this is Ken from Kentastic Cakes. This is my first tutorial, and I've chosen to do cake pops because people have asked me how they come out so good. I think the way I make them is different than probably other tutorials you've seen, just as far as the ratios and such, but they work well for me, so that's what I'm going to show you. Basically, to start, you need obviously cake, and what I did here is this is one batch of my cake. I make everything from scratch, so there's one batch of cake that I baked just in a half sheet pan, and then I have some buttercream that I made, and obviously a bowl to mix it all in, and then a tray to put the cake pops on once they're rolled. And cake pops, generally speaking, are pretty easy. What I like to do is just start breaking it apart. So just in the bowl, just obviously with your hands. Some people use a food processor. I don't think that's necessary. It just dirties more dishes. But you just basically grinding it up to crumbs, just so you can see. So it's pretty crumbly. So we're gonna do that with the rest. I generally do this one batch at a time. I'll bake a bunch of batches. I have another tray over here in front of me, and I have a couple more in the back that I had baked ahead because I actually have to roll and decorate about 1,000 cake pops in the next week or so. So I'm just trying to get myself in a good position to do that. So I'm just gonna do all this up. Like I said, it doesn't take very long. It takes a couple minutes. So like I said, this is my first tutorial. Hopefully you'll subscribe to my page, my YouTube channel. Just getting started with it. I have a couple of the videos on there. Some time-lapse videos of cakes I've done, as well as some old commercials from when I had my retail shop. A new commercial that I just had finished. So definitely check those out. And I plan on doing many more tutorials. I find that everything's on YouTube. If you want to know how to do something, you can pretty much always find it. What I have found for myself is that when you go on and you look at some of these videos, a lot of these decorators that you're looking at who do amazing work, they have special tools. They seem to have an absolute tool for everything. I don't have that. I don't have the finances to buy tools for every little thing, especially something that you may only use once or once a year. I have a hard time justifying spending the money on certain things, so I have to figure out a way to get the same look on more of a budget. And those are the kind of tutorials I'm hoping to show you in the future. How I do things. Okay, so here we go. That's the last of this tray, all ground up. So we'll move that aside. And here we go. We have a whole bowl of ground up cake. Now, once this is mixed, it will yield or make about anywhere from 53 to 58 cake pops. Generally speaking, 56 is a pretty good number, and a lot of it goes by how consistent you are with your measurements of the dough. So to make the dough now, we've got our ground up cake, we have our buttercream. A lot of tutorials that you would look at for cake pops has very small ratio of frosting to the actual cake because they say it's just for flavor or whatever. But it's really meant, at least in my opinion, to be meant to be used as a binder for the cake, certainly for flavor, but definitely for a binder to get nice, smooth, dense fudgy sort of cake. So I put a lot more. I probably, to one batch of my cake, I probably put a good 2 to 2.5 cups of buttercream. See, I just kind of scooped it in there. And then I'm gonna just work it all in and knead it all in to form a dough. Squeezing it all together. And really, really working it in. And what this is gonna allow us to do, once it's done, is we're gonna wrap it once it's done. And that will allow any pieces or any bit of cake that might still be a little dry, that maybe didn't get mixed in as well as you would have liked. If you wrap it and let it sit for, you know, a few hours or even overnight preferably, it'll actually help sort of moisten those dry spots. So, as you can see, we're just kneading this all together. There's no specific way to do it, it's just mushing it. And keep in mind, you know, the ratio of the frosting that I use is for my cake, for my batch. Your batch might be a smaller batch, it might be a larger batch, and so you have to play with it a little bit just to see what's right for you. Especially if you don't need 55 or 58 cake pops. You know, I tend to make a lot at a time. I make cake pop bouquets out of them, which you can see on my Facebook page, as well as I'll attach a picture of a cake pop bouquet at the end of this video as well. Okay, so this is kneaded together pretty well. And you can see it's like a big ball, and not that I'm ready to do it yet, but as you can see, it's really, really dense. And when you roll it, what you're looking to get is that. It's nice and smooth all around. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna make for a really good tasting cake pop, number one. And also it allows you to make a nice consistent shape. If the dough is too dry, you will tend to get some lumps around the cake pop, around the ball. Also, you know, I found that it's a bit of a technique to roll these pops. So basically, just to sort of start over, you know, you grab it and you're gonna measure it out. I use 2 tablespoons at a time, but just for the purposes of this, so I just grab some and I start by mushing it between my hands really tight, and you really want to use good pressure, hard pressure the whole time, and then you just start rolling like you're rolling a meatball. And as you start rolling it, you slowly separate your hands a bit, still keeping some pressure to help form the ball, like you were using Play-Doh or fondant or anything like that. And there's your ball. Okay, so we're gonna let this sit for a little bit, and I'll come back, and when I come back, we'll start sticking them, okay, and then we'll move on from there. Be right back. Okay, so before we go to the next step, I want to show you. So I still have my dough here, and like I said, you want to wrap it and let it sit for a couple hours. Definitely want to wrap it, because if you don't wrap it, if you're gonna leave it overnight, you don't want to leave anything overnight without being covered, but also the surface of the dough will dry out if you just let it sit, and you really don't want that to happen, because then you have to go and work it all in again. So we're just gonna wrap this tightly with wrap both ways. Okay. Just like that, and then we're gonna let that sit for an hour or two, and then we'll come back and we'll roll them. Okay. Okay, so we're back. It's been a couple hours since we made our dough, and here it is, just unwrapped from the package. You don't need to knead it anymore. I mean, you certainly can, but you don't really need to. So one of the key things with cake pops is you want them to be consistent in size, especially if you're sending someone a gift or you're selling them to someone, or even just making them for a party. You want them to look as close to the same as possible, certainly in size. You may decorate them differently, of course, but the size should be different. So for mine, personally, I use 2 tablespoons of dough per cake pop, and just very simply, I just scoop it, I pack it in as much as I can, and then I smooth it off at the top. So this is a 1 tablespoon, so we'll obviously use 2 of these. When I do the second one, when I scoop it out, I always mush it together to get started. Because what I'll do is I'll measure out like a dozen of them, and then I'll stop and I'll roll them all. But by squishing them together just a little bit ahead of time, you won't get any dryness between the 2 pieces, which sometimes makes it a little more difficult to roll them nicely. So we're gonna just do out a couple of these real quick. Yeah, this is the tedious part of the whole thing, measuring and rolling. Hopefully you have strong hands, especially if you're doing a lot of them, or you have someone that has strong hands that can roll them with you or for you. There are devices, or whatever you want to call them, on the market that you can get that theoretically makes it easier to roll cake pops, and you can roll multiple at a time. I've tried them. I find them very difficult to use because your dough has to be absolutely perfectly consistent with what it needs to be able to roll the cake pops. If it's off even just a little bit, it's not going to work for you. So for me personally, as tiring as it is, I just find this to be a more consistent way. Okay, so I just rolled out 4 of them for now. So like I said earlier, using some good pressure between your hands and rolling, and then separating slowly. You can see how I'm doing that, and nice ball. And then just line them up on my half sheet. Based on a two tablespoon size on a half sheet, you can fit 88. You can fit 8 across, 11 the long way. And see, everything's nice and pretty well uniform. Every once in a while you have a little trouble with, maybe you get one that looks a little more oblong, a little flatter like that. So you just kind of have to work it a little bit more, and you can shape it with your fingers if you need to. But ultimately, they should be all relatively close. So those are the 4 I rolled. You can see they're all pretty similar in size. That one's a little bit taller, a little squished, so we'll just push that down a little bit. All right, so just stay tuned. I'm gonna roll the rest of this out, and then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna stick them with our pop sticks. Okay, so enjoy the time-lapse interlude. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that time lapse. I'm exhausted, but this is what we got. Out of that one batch, I ended up getting 58 pretty much perfectly consistent cake pops. So next I'm just gonna clean up my space a little bit, and when I come back in about 2 seconds, I will show you how to stick them. Okay, all right. So we have our cake balls rolled, all looking good, all pretty consistent. Next thing we need to do is put our lollipop sticks in them to allow us to have a handle to dip them in the chocolate, which obviously makes the lollipop part. So what I use for mine, for this size cake pop, are just typical lollipop sticks. These are 6" long by 1/8 of an inch diameter. They work well for me. If you go with anything a little bit bigger, you run the risk of splitting the cake pop when you go to stick it. So you cannot just take these and stick them in the cake pop and think that you're done. That's not going to work. So what I did, you need something to help adhere it and keep it stuck to the pop. So what I have here is just a little bit of white melting chocolate that I heated up in the microwave 30 seconds at a time. I had the little melting chips, pellets, whatever you want to call them, 30 seconds at a time or so, stirring it up to like a good consistency, and it's nice and melted. I'm just going to take the stick, dip it in, get off any of the super extra, and then I'm gonna stick it in. When I stick it, I push down and I twist at the same time. If you just push it in, again, you run a higher risk of the dough splitting, which in most cases isn't that big of a deal. Depending how big of a split it is, you can still dip them, and a lot of times the chocolate will fill in that gap, and then when you're decorating them, you don't even notice it. But other times it splits it pretty far where you really can't use it, or you have to re-roll it or what have you. So pushing down, slight twist. See if I can show you a close-up of one. So again, you don't need a ton of chocolate on the stick. So as I'm pushing down, I'm twisting at the same time, going in maybe about 1 centimeter, maybe 1.5 centimeters. You don't want to push it all the way through. You don't want to push it till you hit bottom, because then, depending on the consistency of your cake pop and the weight of it on the stick, when you're finished, you might actually find that the cake pop just slides down the stick because there's no resistance from anything. So that's basically it for sticking the pop. So I'm going to stick the rest of these, and then we're going to put it in the refrigerator to chill for about an hour. That allows the chocolate to get hard, and stick to the cake pop. Also, I want to show you. So you see this little ball, little lump at the top where the chocolate is. That's perfectly fine. Don't worry about that. Obviously, you can smooth it out if you want, but you don't need to, because when we dip it in the chocolate, it's going to cover that anyways. Okay, so we'll be back in a bit. Okay, everyone, so we're back. Our cake pops have chilled for a bit. Now it's time to get decorating. So I'm using white chocolate today that I melted in the microwave. Again, 30 seconds at a time, stirring it between each one until you get the right consistency, which you really want to have a nice runny consistency like this. Depending on the chocolate you use, you may get this consistency on its own. If you're melting it and you find that it's still very thick and clumpy, which does happen often, you can add a little bit of vegetable oil to it at a time, stir it up, add a little bit more if you need to till you get the right consistency. Hopefully you don't need to add too much, because no one wants that much oil in their cake pops. Because what actually happens is all the oil that you're putting in, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it will actually sort of seep into the cake pop, and you'll see a little bit of discoloration. Most people probably don't notice it, but still not that pretty. So I have my proper consistency. I'm actually going to put it into a travel mug. I use an insulated travel mug because it helps keep it a little bit melted a little bit longer. Just want to make sure that it's wide enough to, for the width of the cake pop, so you're not banging on the sides or anything like that. So I decorate mine very simply. Sometimes you'll go online and you'll be looking at cake pops, and people be doing all these crazy things, making snowmen and popsicles and icing cones and all this other stuff. You know what? Those are really nice, but that's just not me. I have a hard time justifying spending that much time on them for the amount of money that you're probably getting for them. If you're doing them for a special occasion and you're at home, you're a home baker, and you want to do something fun like that, have at it. But from my perspective, I like to keep it simple. My customers seem to like it simple. So in that regard, we are around the holidays. So with what I'm showing you today, we're actually just going to use some red and green sugar to decorate. So that means, so what we're going to do is we're going to dip the cake pop and we're going to decorate it immediately, as opposed to dipping it, letting it dry, and then decorating it with other things, which I do as well. I drizzle it with, other chocolate, different colors and things like that, or what have you, or other kinds of sprinkles and things like that. But for today, for this tutorial, we're just going to keep it super simple. Obviously, you can get different kinds of sugar, different colors of sugar, different thickness, like coarseness of the sugar. So mug full of chocolate, cake pops going in. When I dip it in, I give it a little bit of a twist to go down, just to the edge of where that little chocolate ball is that you started with from when you dipped your pops. And then you'll just lightly tap the side to get all the excess off. If you don't do this, as soon as you put it in your little drying rack that I have right here, this thing right here, any of the excess is just gonna pour down the stick. So you just keep lightly tapping it till you feel comfortable that you're at a good point. And then when you get to that point, I take it and I actually flip it over to the other side and just give it a couple little taps so that little drip smooths into the chocolate. So as you can see, I only went just very little bit past the edge of the cake pop, and that's it. So this one I'm gonna put aside because I'll decorate that later with some colored drizzle. And I will say that you have to work relatively quickly once you start dipping, because depending on your environment, if it's cool, the chocolate's gonna start cooling and the sugar won't stick to it. So we're gonna do this one a little bit quicker. So we'll give it a quick tap, 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 tap. Every once in a while you get a little chunk of chocolate that maybe didn't get melted and it gets sort of stuck on the cake pop. Just tap it, keep tapping, and eventually it either comes off. And if it doesn't come off, it's still not that big of a deal because the sugar is going to cover it all. And give a little bit of tap on the other side. And I take the sugar. I don't dip it in the sugar. I sprinkle the sugar on top of the pop. If you stick the cake pop in the sugar, it's going to just smudge all the chocolate and it's not going to be pretty. Very simple. Easy peasy. Do another one just so you can see. And again, these cake pops have chilled for just about an hour or so. You really don't even need to go that long. It's really just long enough to give the chocolate that you use for sticking them, giving it enough time and enough cold to harden inside the cake pop. The cake itself doesn't need to be cold. In fact, you're better off having it at room temperature. Sometimes what I find is if the cake pop is too cold against the warm chocolate, sometimes the chocolate will crack. And if that happens, depending on how you're decorating it, may or may not matter. The way I'm decorating it right now, it doesn't really matter. Cracks won't show up, or very unnoticeable. Again, very simple. All right, should I do one more? I'll do one more quick one, and just so you hopefully feel confident with it. Just going just past that little button of chocolate on top of the cake pop, where the stick joins the cake. Quick tap. Now, if your cake pop happens to have a crack in it, you can still do this. You just have to be careful of where you're tapping it. So what I mean by that is if there's a big crack and you're tapping, you want to tap with the crack towards the chocolate. if that makes sense. Because if you have the crack on top, so if there was a crack here, right there, I would want that facing down. So when I'm tapping, all the pressure of the cake that's not cracked is going on the stick. If you have the crack side up, as soon as you start tapping, the cake pop's just gonna plop off. All right. So that is my first tutorial on doing cake pops. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't, too boring. But anyways, subscribe to my page. I'm gonna start posting other tutorials that hopefully will be helpful to you. And definitely leave comments below. I love constructive feedback. And I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.